What if the fairy tale prince who once symbolized hope for a modern monarchy has now become its greatest threat? What if the man who once walked behind his mother's coffin, with the eyes of the world upon him, is now standing on the edge of being permanently banished from the very institution that shaped him? This isn't a wild tabloid headline or a feverish conspiracy theory. This is the shocking reality facing Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, as he prepares to set foot in Britain once again after nearly half a year of absence. From the outside, it might seem like a routine trip. Harry is scheduled to attend the Wellchild Awards in London, a charity event he has long supported and one that connects deeply with his personal mission of highlighting children's struggles and triumphs. But behind this carefully crafted public appearance lies a storm that has been brewing for months. The truth is, Harry isn't just returning for charity, nor is he returning out of love for family. He is returning with an agenda, one that could shake the monarchy to its core. And King Charles, having learned of this hidden plan, is preparing to act in a way that no one thought possible, by banning his own son from the palace forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine the gravity of this situation. A king, not just any king but the father of the man in question, weighing the future of the crown against the bond of blood. Think about the sheer drama of that choice. Would you, in Charles's place, put the monarchy first and exile your own son? Or would you risk the integrity of an institution that has stood for centuries just to keep the family bond intact? These are not hypothetical questions in some fictional drama. They are questions being whispered within the marble walls of Buckingham Palace and behind closed doors at Clarence House. Why does this matter now? Because the monarchy has always thrived on symbolism, on carefully guarded appearances, and on continuity that stretches back over 1,000 years. For a prince to openly rebel, for a son to seek leverage against a father who wears the crown, and for that father to respond with the ultimate punishment, banishment, is a narrative so explosive that it threatens to tear at the very fabric of the royal brand. This isn't just a family feud. This is about the survival of an institution in the modern world. Harry's hidden agenda revolves around something deceptively simple: royal titles for his children, Archie and Lilibet. On the surface, titles may seem like outdated, ceremonial labels that hold little significance in today's world. But in the world of royalty, titles are not just names. They are shields, access points, tickets to privilege, and a statement of legitimacy. By pushing for Archie and Lilibet to be officially recognized with the titles of Prince and Princess, Harry isn't just asking for a favor. He is demanding that his children be anchored in the future of the monarchy, despite his and Meghan's explosive exit and their constant criticism of the family that titles represent. Here lies the contradiction. Harry and Meghan left royal life in pursuit of independence, denouncing the institution's constraints, calling it toxic, and airing grievances in front of millions. Yet now, from their home in Montecito, they are lobbying for the very thing they once rejected. Doesn't that sound ironic to you? Doesn't it sound like playing both sides of the game? And if you were King Charles, wouldn't you question whether this request was truly about the children's future, or whether it was part of a larger scheme to maintain influence, power, and prestige outside the walls of the monarchy? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to revisit the path that led here. Harry's relationship with his father has been one of affection and deep pain, shaped by tragedy, duty, and constant scrutiny. After the death of Princess Diana, Charles tried, in his own flawed way, to shield his sons from the crushing burden of grief while still fulfilling his own royal obligations. But Harry never forgot the coldness of the institution. He never forgot how the monarchy seemed to put duty above love. That wound never fully healed. Over the years, it hardened into resentment. And when Meghan Markle entered the picture, her own struggles with the institution poured fuel on that resentment, turning it into rebellion. The Oprah interview, the memoir Spare, the Netflix docuseries, each one was not just a revelation but an act of defiance, a calculated strike at the monarchy's carefully maintained image. Charles, a man who has waited longer than any other heir in history to wear the crown, watched as his son chipped away at the family's credibility on the world stage. Can you imagine the betrayal? The heartbreak? To Charles, these weren't just criticisms. They were daggers aimed at the heart of the monarchy itself. And yet, despite all of this, Harry still wants something from the institution he has burned at every turn. The irony is almost Shakespearean, isn't it? A son who denounces the monarchy but seeks its validation for his children. A king who loves his son but cannot afford to give him what he wants without risking everything. It's like watching a royal tragedy unfold in real time, with the world as its audience. But here's where the stakes become unbearable. Charles has learned that Harry's return is not merely about titles. Behind the polite smiles and charitable appearances lies a much deeper strategy. Harry's real agenda is to pressure his father, publicly and privately, into granting titles and privileges for Archie and Lilibet. And once Charles understood the depth of this push, he realized that allowing Harry back into the fold, even symbolically, could undermine his reign before it had even fully begun. Consider the timing. Charles is still in the delicate early years of his kingship, his every move compared to the towering legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. He faces challenges from within and without, questions about the monarchy's relevance, growing Republican movements in Commonwealth nations, and constant media scrutiny. The last thing he can afford is to look weak or manipulated by his estranged son. If Harry succeeds in forcing Charles's hand, it sets a dangerous precedent that the monarchy can be influenced by those who have walked away, that duty and loyalty mean little compared to pressure and public spectacle. And so, the stakes are crystal clear. If Charles gives in, he risks weakening the monarchy. If he resists, he risks permanently alienating his son and grandchildren. It's a lose-lose scenario. But one choice protects the monarchy, the other destroys it. This is why whispers are growing louder, that King Charles is prepared to take the most drastic step of all, to bar Harry from palace grounds, to strip away any remaining privileges, and to send the message once and for all that there is no coming back. A banishment not just in practice, but in principle. Can you even imagine the symbolism? A son of Diana, the boy once cherished by the world, standing outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, knowing he is no longer welcome? The emotional weight of this is staggering. For Charles, it is the heartbreak of choosing duty over family. For Harry, it is the humiliation of being shut out from the very place he once called home. For Meghan, it is validation of every grievance she has ever voiced about the monarchy's coldness. And for Archie and Lilibet, it is a legacy of conflict they never asked for but will inherit nonetheless. And yet, the story doesn't end here. In fact, this is only the beginning. Because as much as Charles is prepared to protect the monarchy, Harry is not a man who will go down quietly. He has shown time and again that when backed into a corner, he fights with every weapon at his disposal. Media, memoirs, interviews, alliances. If Charles truly slams the door shut, Harry's countermove could ignite a firestorm so intense that it threatens the monarchy's very survival in a modern world. Which leaves us with the question, who really holds the power here? The king with his crown, or the son with his story? The world is watching, waiting for the next move in this royal chess match. And as Harry steps onto British soil once again, the game is about to enter its most dangerous stage yet. Because what comes next will not only decide Harry's future, it could decide the fate of the monarchy itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Picture the scene. The skies over London are heavy with gray, the city humming with its usual mix of urgency and tradition. Black cabs weave through traffic, red buses carry their loads of commuters, and tourists snap pictures of landmarks that have stood for centuries. But on this particular Monday, all eyes aren't on Big Ben, the Tower of London, or even Buckingham Palace. They're on the arrival of a man who hasn't set foot in Britain for nearly half a year, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. For some, his return stirs nostalgia, a reminder of the young prince who once brought charm and relatability to an ancient institution. For others, it ignites anger, memories of betrayal, of family secrets laid bare, of a monarchy embarrassed on the world stage. And for Harry himself, this is no simple homecoming. This is a battlefield. Because every step he takes on British soil carries weight, every handshake is scrutinized, and every smile is analyzed for hidden meaning. Why here? Why now? The official explanation is simple enough. Harry will attend the Wellchild Awards, an event that honors the courage of seriously ill children and the dedication of those who care for them. Harry has supported the charity for years, and his genuine passion for the cause is undeniable. In another lifetime, this would have been a heartwarming, apolitical moment, a prince championing a noble cause. But in the wake of Megxit, Oprah, and Spare, nothing Harry does can ever be just charity again. Every move is read as a strategy. Every public appearance is a chess piece moved on a global board. Think about that for a second. Imagine walking into a room full of cameras, knowing that half the world is waiting for you to stumble, while the other half hopes you'll prove them wrong. That's the tension Harry carries as he makes this return. It's not just about well, child, it's about timing, about symbolism, about a carefully chosen moment to reinsert himself into the narrative of the monarchy. But here's the twist. While the public sees the charity event, behind closed doors Harry has a second agenda. He desperately wants a private meeting with his father, King Charles. Not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to push for something far more controversial: royal titles for his children, Archie and Lilibet. Do you feel the contradiction here? This is the same man who once declared that titles meant nothing, that he wanted his children to grow up free from the suffocating burden of royal expectations. And yet now, he's back in Britain, pushing harder than ever for those same titles he once dismissed. Is this about securing his children's place in history? Or is it about leverage, a way of forcing the monarchy to keep him tethered to its prestige even as he lives outside its walls? As Harry steps off the plane, cameras flash. Reporters whisper. Royal aides watch closely. Every detail matters. His posture, his expression, even the cut of his suit. Everything will be dissected in tomorrow's headlines. The man who once represented hope for a modern, relatable monarchy is now returning as its greatest wild card. And here's the deeper irony. His trip is being watched more closely by the palace than by the press. Because King Charles knows what Harry's true intention is. He knows that this visit isn't about duty or charity. It's about pressure. Pressure to bend. Pressure to compromise. Pressure to hand over the one thing Harry craves above all else: legitimacy for his children within the royal hierarchy. But if Charles gives in, what does that mean for the monarchy? Would titles for Archie and Lilibet be seen as an olive branch, or as a capitulation? Would it strengthen the family, or embolden Harry and Meghan to demand even more from across the Atlantic? This is where the tension begins to simmer. Harry has returned to a country he no longer calls home, to an institution he openly criticizes, and to a father who now wears the weight of a crown heavier than anyone before him. Every encounter will be a test. Every word exchanged behind closed doors could determine the monarchy's path. And the public? They smell drama. Crowds gather outside venues, some cheering, some jeering. Placards appear, some declaring support, others calling Harry a traitor. Social media erupts with speculation. Will he meet Charles? Will he meet William? Will Meghan join later? Questions swirl like storm clouds, and the anticipation only grows. But beneath the noise, beneath the headlines, one thing is clear. This visit is not routine. It's not random. It's calculated. Harry has chosen his moment carefully. He has returned not as a prodigal son seeking forgiveness, but as a strategist playing his next move in a game that could upend the monarchy itself. And yet, what Harry doesn't realize is that the palace is already 2 steps ahead. King Charles, cautious and deliberate, has already pieced together his son's intentions. He knows the agenda, he knows the stakes, and he knows that this meeting, if it happens at all, could be the breaking point that forces him to make a choice no father should ever have to make. Which begs the question, why would Harry risk it all? Why would he walk back into the lion's den, knowing the danger, knowing the tension, knowing the risk of rejection on a scale that would humiliate him before the entire world? Maybe he believes he can charm his father one last time. Maybe he thinks the memory of Diana, the bond of blood, the innocence of his children will soften Charles's resolve. Or maybe, just maybe, Harry is gambling everything on the hope that the monarchy cannot afford the optics of a son being shut out forever. But what Harry doesn't yet understand is that Charles is not the man he once knew. He's no longer just a father. He's a king. And kings do not bend easily, especially not when the survival of the crown is at stake. And so, as Harry prepares for the Well Child Awards, smiling for the cameras, shaking hands, and making heartfelt speeches, he is also preparing for something much more dangerous: A private showdown with the most powerful man in Britain, who also happens to be his father. The stage is set. The players are in position, and the world is watching. But what Harry doesn't know is that this simple visit will unravel into a chain of events that will leave him facing a fate no one thought possible. Because the real reason behind Harry's sudden return would shake the palace to its core. What does it mean when the bond between father and son becomes a battlefield? For most of us, those words conjure images of slammed doors, angry phone calls, and maybe long silences over family dinners. But for Prince Harry and King Charles, that battlefield is global. Every move, every word, every rumor echoes across continents, shaping headlines, public opinion, and even the future of the British monarchy itself. This chapter isn't about charity events or polite small talk in gilded corridors. It's about something far more primal: love, betrayal, power, and the impossible weight of a crown. Because behind the cameras, behind the smiles and rehearsed gestures, Harry and Charles are at war. Not the kind of war fought with swords or guns, but one fought with secrets, public statements, withheld invitations, and, most damaging of all, trust that has been broken so many times it may never be repaired. Let's win back. For decades, Charles lived in the shadow of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. His role was to wait, to prepare, and to carry the burden of being the heir for longer than anyone in history. In that time, he became a father to William and Harry, trying to balance the impossible: duty to the nation and duty to his children. Many would argue he failed at both. For Harry, the scars of that failure run deep. Think back to the image that defined Harry for the world: the 12-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin, head bowed, grief written across his face. Millions watched in silence, horrified and heartbroken. That boy became a man, but he never left that grief behind. And in his eyes, Charles, the father who was supposed to protect him, chose duty and protocol over compassion. Do you blame him for carrying that wound for life? Fast forward to adulthood. Charles, now king, and Harry, now exiled in California, find themselves on opposite sides of a chasm. One is the embodiment of the monarchy, the other is its loudest critic. One believes in preservation and continuity. The other believes in tearing down walls of secrecy. But they are bound together by blood, by history, by a name that carries weight beyond imagination. The irony couldn't be greater. Here's the twist: Charles still loves his son. There is no question about that. Insiders say he often expresses hope for reconciliation, that he longs to meet his grandchildren more often, that he hates the constant stream of bitterness. But love isn't enough when the monarchy is on the line. Charles's love is always filtered through duty. And Harry knows it. That knowledge fuels the resentment, the fire, the fury that makes Harry lash out. Remember Spare? The memoir wasn't just a book. It was a declaration of war. Page after page painted Charles as cold, detached, and consumed by his role as heir. Harry accused him of prioritizing the crown over family, of failing Diana, of failing him. And let's not forget the Oprah interview, where Harry and Meghan threw open the palace gates and let the world peek inside. Charles wasn't just embarrassed, he was humiliated. Ask yourself, how would you feel if your child told the world your most painful family secrets? Would you forgive? Would you move on? Or would you build walls so high that no apology could climb over them? That's the place Charles is in now. A father torn apart, a king under siege. Yet here's where the contradiction lies. For all the pain Harry has caused, Charles still extends olive branches, small, careful, cautious gestures. Invitations to coronations, the occasional private phone call, polite but strained exchanges through aides. Charles is desperate not to look like a king who abandons his son, even as he refuses to let Harry dictate terms. It's a balancing act so delicate that one misstep could shatter the entire family. Meanwhile, Harry knows exactly what he's doing. Every time he speaks publicly, every time he writes, every time he makes an appearance, he calculates the effect on his father's reign. The war isn't just about personal grievances, it's about leverage. Harry understands that Charles, as king, cannot afford endless scandals. So Harry uses his voice like a weapon, knowing that one explosive revelation can cause damage that takes months, even years, to repair. This is not a fair fight. This is not father and son arguing over dinner. This is strategy, power, and survival. And it's playing out under the relentless gaze of the world. But what happens when Harry finally comes face to face with Charles during this visit? Will he soften, appeal to his father's heart, remind him of Diana's love and the innocence of his grandchildren? Or will he sharpen the blade, pressing Charles with ultimatums? And here's the danger. Charles is no longer just a father. He is the king of the United Kingdom, the head of the Commonwealth, the symbol of continuity after his mother's 70-year reign. His choices are not private. They are public acts that shape the monarchy itself. If he bends to Harry, he risks looking weak. If he resists, he risks looking heartless. Either way, the war escalates. And let's not forget William, the heir to the throne. He, too, plays a role in this war, often acting as Charles's shield, the loyal son who upholds the monarchy while his brother tears it down. William's presence makes reconciliation even harder. How can Charles risk alienating the heir for the sake of the spare? It's a brutal calculation, but one Charles may already have made. This chapter of their war is about to hit its peak. Harry, emboldened by his return, believes he can corner his father into a decision. Charles, wounded but wary, is preparing for battle in his own quiet way. Both believe they can win. But in truth, this is a war where victory comes at a cost too high for either to bear. And as the clock ticks toward their private meeting, as aides whisper and bodyguards stand ready, the atmosphere grows thick with anticipation. What will Harry say? What will Charles do? And who, in the end, will yield? Because when Charles agreed to see his son, he had no idea that the bombshell Harry was about to drop would not only shake their fragile relationship, it would shake the palace to its very foundations. But what Harry was about to reveal would leave even the king unprepared. What could possibly drive a son to return to the father he has accused, condemned, and publicly humiliated? What would make Prince Harry, after burning bridges in front of the entire world, come back and sit before King Charles with a request? The answer lies in one phrase that seems so simple, yet is loaded with centuries of power: royal titles. This is the hidden agenda. This is the reason behind Harry's sudden, carefully timed return to Britain. Forget the charity event. Forget the optics of reconciliation. Beneath it all, Harry has one singular goal: to secure official royal titles for his children, Archie and Lilibet. Now, at first glance, it sounds almost harmless. What's in a title? Prince, princess, it's just a word, right? Wrong. In the world of royalty, titles aren't just words. They're currency. They're power. They're validation. A royal title means access, prestige, influence. It means your name will forever be etched into the history of the monarchy. And for children like Archie and Lilibet, it could mean opportunities and privileges that extend far beyond Britain's shores. But here's where the story twists like a dagger. Remember when Harry and Meghan insisted they didn't care about titles? Remember when they told the world they wanted to raise their children outside the suffocating grip of royal expectation? Meghan herself said during the Oprah interview that titles didn't matter, that what mattered was protection and safety. Yet here we are, with Harry returning to Britain to demand the very thing they once dismissed. Is this about their children's safety, or is it about something else entirely? Ask yourself this. Why now? Why? After years of slamming the monarchy as toxic, racist, and archaic, would Harry suddenly decide that his children must carry the very titles linked to that same system? Could it be that life in California, without the official stamp of royalty, isn't as influential as they thought it would be? Could it be that Netflix contracts and podcast deals don't carry the same weight as being a prince or princess of the United Kingdom? This is where Meghan's role becomes impossible to ignore. Behind every public appearance, behind every push, her influence looms large. Meghan knows how the world works, how brands are built, how narratives are shaped, how status opens doors. Having Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet isn't just about family honor. It's about marketability, power, and ensuring that the Sussex legacy remains relevant long after the spotlight fades. And Harry? He's caught between two forces, his father's crown and his wife's ambitions. Does he truly believe this push for titles is about his children's protection? Or has he convinced himself of that because it makes the demand sound noble, not self-serving? This is the contradiction at the heart of Harry's agenda. Now imagine the moment. Behind closed doors, Harry looks his father in the eye and lays out his case. He appeals to Charles not as king, but as a grandfather. He paints pictures of Archie and Lilibet growing up in America, disconnected from their heritage. He speaks of Diana's dream of family unity, of fairness, of legacy. He leans on emotion. He leans on guilt. He leans on the weight of history. But Charles is not so easily swayed. Because here's the truth. Charles has already seen through the act. He knows what this request really means. He knows that giving Harry what he wants would weaken his reign. Granting those titles would not just be a symbolic gesture. It would be an admission that Harry and Meghan still have influence, that even outside the palace walls, they can bend the monarchy to their will. For Charles, this is dangerous. Very dangerous. Imagine what message it sends if someone can abandon royal duty, attack the family, accuse them of cruelty, and still walk away with everything they want. It's not just a question of titles. It's a question of survival for the monarchy. Here's where it gets even darker. Reports suggest Charles has discovered evidence of just how far Harry and Meghan have gone in their pursuit of influence. Private communications, strategic leaks, meetings that weren't supposed to happen, plans to use the children's status as bargaining chips. If true, it means this isn't just a request from a son to a father. It's a calculated negotiation with the monarchy itself as the prize. And Harry? He's walking a tightrope. He knows he's risking everything by pushing too hard. He knows his father is not a man to be cornered. Yet he also believes he holds the ultimate weapon, public sympathy. He knows that if Charles denies his children titles, he can paint the palace as cold, cruel, even discriminatory. And in a world where optics matter as much as truth, that could be devastating for the monarchy. So we're left with this question. Is Harry's agenda really about Archie and Lilibet? Or is it about reclaiming the power and influence he lost when he walked away? Because the more Charles looks into it, the clearer the answer becomes. This isn't about children. This isn't about family. This is about leverage. And once Charles realizes the full extent of Harry's plan, the outcome is inevitable. Harry thinks he's playing the game. But the king has already moved his pieces into place. And when Charles uncovers the truth, Harry won't just be denied. He'll be punished. Because what Harry didn't anticipate was that Charles had already uncovered evidence of something far more dangerous than a plea for titles. And once that evidence came to light, Harry's hidden agenda would unravel before his very eyes. But what Charles had discovered would change everything and leave Harry facing consequences he never imagined. How much can a father take before love gives way to duty? How many wounds can be reopened before patience runs out? King Charles, for all his calm demeanor and carefully rehearsed smiles, is not a man without breaking points. And with Harry's hidden agenda now laid bare, the dam inside him is straining, cracking, ready to burst. For months, Charles had played the role of the patient king, the father who hoped that time would heal, who thought that if he stayed quiet, perhaps the storm would pass. He watched as Harry and Meghan launched interviews, docuseries, and memoirs that dragged the monarchy through the mud. He saw headlines splashed across the globe portraying him as cold, aloof, and unfeeling. He heard the words racist, neglectful, unfit, whispered in the same breath as his name. And through it all, he remained silent, holding to the mantra drilled into him since childhood. Never complain, never explain. But silence doesn't mean indifference. Inside the walls of Clarence House and Buckingham Palace, Charles simmered. Imagine his position. Finally king after 7 decades of waiting, burdened with proving himself in the shadow of his mother's extraordinary reign, and then forced to endure his own son becoming his loudest critic. That's not just betrayal. That's humiliation. Now, with Harry standing before him demanding titles for Archie and Lilibet, Charles feels the weight of every insult, every revelation, every act of rebellion crash down upon him at once. The request isn't just bold. It's audacious. It's Harry saying, "You owe me. You owe my children. You owe the legacy of Diana." And Charles knows that granting it would be a fatal error, a moment of weakness that could haunt his reign forever. Consider what's at stake. Charles is not merely a father here. He is the monarch. His first responsibility is to the crown, to the people, to the continuation of the institution. He must protect it from scandal, manipulation, and internal decay. Granting Harry's demand would set a precedent, that those who walk away can still dictate terms from afar. It would open the monarchy to ridicule, erode respect, and hand its fiercest critics ammunition on a silver platter. But here's the cruel paradox. Charles also knows that refusing his son could destroy any hope of reconciliation. Denying those titles means Archie and Lilibet will grow up as symbols of rejection, as living reminders of the fracture in the family. It means Meghan will cry foul, and Harry will unleash his fury on the world stage. It means the pain of Diana's legacy will be twisted into accusations that Charles is a heartless king and a failed father. This is the breaking point: duty versus love, crown versus blood. And the choice Charles is forced to make is one no father should ever face. Behind the gilded doors, aides and courtiers whisper. Some urge caution. Your Majesty, perhaps a compromise. Perhaps delay the decision. Others are more ruthless. The Duke must understand that loyalty is the price of privilege. If he cannot give one, he cannot expect the other. Every piece of advice carries weight, but Charles knows the decision must come from him alone. And so, late at night, he sits in his study. The lamps glow dimly, portraits of monarchs past staring down at him with cold, unblinking eyes. Elizabeth, his mother, whose steadiness defined the monarchy. George VI, who bore the crown during the darkest days of war. Each one a reminder that kingship is not about comfort, it's about sacrifice. And as Charles looks at the faces of his ancestors, he realizes he must do what they would have done. He must choose the crown. Think about that moment. Imagine being a father, staring at the photograph of your youngest son, remembering him as a red-haired boy playing in the garden, remembering his laughter, his stubbornness, his joy. And then imagine having to say, he can no longer be trusted. He must be kept at arm's length. That is not just a political decision. That is heartbreak. But Charles has no illusions anymore. He has seen Harry's demands, his strategies, his willingness to use the children as bargaining chips. He has read the leaks, the emails, the reports that prove this isn't about family, it's about power. And once you see that, there's no going back. So, Charles reaches his breaking point. No more compromises. No more olive branches. No more bending to keep the peace. The monarchy must come first, even if it means losing his son forever. The next morning, the air in the palace is thick with tension. Orders are given quietly but firmly. Senior aides are instructed to limit Harry's access. Security protocols are adjusted. Rooms once open to him are locked. It's not yet an official ban, but the machinery of exclusion is already in motion. Charles has crossed the line from patience to resolve. And as Harry moves about London, preparing for his charity event and plotting his meeting with his father, he doesn't yet realize that the man waiting for him is no longer the father he once knew. He is the king, and the king has decided that the cost of keeping Harry close is simply too high. The tragedy is that both men believe they are right. Harry thinks he's fighting for his children's future. Charles thinks he's protecting the monarchy's survival. But when father and son collide with such opposing visions, there can be no compromise, only consequences. And that's when Charles makes the decision that will change Harry's life forever. Because once a king reaches his breaking point, there's no turning back. But what came next would not just close doors for Harry. It would slam them shut in a way that echoed through every corridor of the palace. The sound of footsteps echoes differently when they're no longer welcome. That's what Harry would soon discover. For most of his life, the grand corridors of the royal residences were his second home. He knew the creak of certain staircases in Clarence House, the scent of polished wood in Sandringham, the hushed reverence of Windsor Castle's halls. These places weren't just buildings. They were his childhood, his sanctuary, his inheritance. But now, those very doors, once opened to him without question, were being quietly and deliberately closed. Not with slamming locks or shouted orders, but with a cold efficiency that made the message clear. Harry was no longer trusted inside the palace. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a deliberate act of exclusion, a way of saying, you are not one of us anymore. Picture it. A royal aide approaches Harry's security detail, informing them discreetly that access has been limited. Key cards that once opened hidden gates no longer work. The private apartments he once visited with ease are now off limits. He doesn't yet know it, but the invisible barriers are already being raised around him. The palace is drawing its line in the sand. Think about the symbolism. The palace isn't just a home. It's the beating heart of monarchy. For centuries, to be inside those walls was to belong, to be part of a bloodline stretching back through history. And now, Harry, born a prince, raised within those very walls, is being shown the exit. It's a humiliation more powerful than words. But why close the doors now? Why not earlier, after the Oprah interview, after the Netflix documentary, after Spare? Because now Charles understands that Harry's agenda isn't just about grievances. It's about leverage. By seeking royal titles for Archie and Lilibet, Harry is trying to anchor himself and his children into the monarchy's future. Charles can't let that happen. If he does, the crown risks being undermined from within. And so the king acts. He makes it clear to his inner circle that Harry is no longer to be given free access to royal residences. Not Balmoral, not Windsor, not Clarence House, and most importantly, not Buckingham Palace. The message spreads like ripples through the staff. Some are shocked, some relieved, but none are surprised. Everyone knows something had to give. Now put yourself in Harry's shoes. He arrives, expecting to at least have private space in the places he once roamed freely. Instead, he finds himself treated like a guest, an unwelcome one. Every request is checked, every meeting scrutinized. He feels eyes on him constantly, not with warmth, but with suspicion. The walls that once represented family now loom over him like a fortress, impenetrable and unyielding. Can you imagine the sting of that? To be born into royalty, to grow up with the palace as your playground, and then be told you no longer belong there? It's exile without the drama of banishment. It's a quiet, calculated erasure. And for Harry, who thrives on symbolism and public image, the sting is unbearable. What's worse is that the news begins to leak. The media catches wind that Harry has been denied access to certain royal quarters. Headlines swirl. Prince Harry frozen out. Palace doors shut. King Charles draws the line. Social media erupts, some mocking him, others sympathizing. The court of public opinion is as divided as the royal family itself. And Meghan? Back in California, she is furious. To her, this is vindication of everything she has ever said about the monarchy being cold, unwelcoming, cruel. She sees it not as a strategic move by Charles, but as proof that they were right to leave. Harry, caught between his wife's outrage and his father's firm hand, finds himself in the middle of a war he can't win. Yet here's the twist. The palace's quiet move to shut Harry out doesn't end things. It escalates them. Because Harry is not the kind of man to accept rejection silently. He grows more desperate, more determined. He begins to plot his next move. He knows he can't simply walk away, not when his children's future is on the line. So what does he do? He begins to push harder, to make calls, to send messages, to demand meetings. He leans on every emotional lever he has left, memories of Diana, appeals to Charles as a grandfather, even veiled warnings about what might happen if the palace doesn't give him what he wants. But here's the problem. Charles is no longer just a father. He's a king who has reached his breaking point. And the more Harry pushes, the more resolute Charles becomes. The doors aren't just closed, they're bolted. Imagine it. A prince at the gates of his own family's palace, unable to enter, reduced to pleading and bargaining. It's the image of ultimate exile. And it's the clearest sign yet that the bond between father and son has been shattered beyond repair. Still, Harry refuses to give up. If he can't walk through the doors, he'll find another way, another strategy, another weapon. Because in his mind, the fight for Archie and Lilibet's titles is too important to lose. He's willing to risk it all, even humiliation, to get what he wants. But Charles? He's already preparing his counterstrike. He knows Harry will come back harder, louder, more desperate, and he's ready for it. Which means the stage is set for the next move in this brutal chess match. A move that will push Harry into a corner he never imagined. Because when one door closes, Harry is about to learn that sometimes it slams shut with a force that shakes the entire palace. But Harry wasn't about to walk away quietly. His counter-move would be explosive. What do you do when the walls close in? When every avenue that once welcomed you has been blocked? When the doors that once swung wide at your approach now stand locked and guarded? For Prince Harry, the answer was simple. You push back harder. You fight. You gamble everything you have left. This was the moment when desperation overtook diplomacy. Harry, cut off from the palace, sidelined by Charles, and humiliated by leaks that he'd been denied access, made the fateful choice to escalate. He would not let his father's cold rejection be the final word. He had come back to Britain with one purpose: to secure titles for Archie and Lilibet, and he would not return to California empty-handed. The charity event, the Wellchild Awards, became little more than a backdrop. Cameras captured him smiling, chatting, shaking hands. But behind the mask, Harry was seething. He knew Charles had slammed the doors shut. He knew whispers were circulating that he was untrustworthy, that his presence was toxic. But Harry believed he had one final weapon: leverage. Here's where things take a darker turn. Harry began to hint, quietly at first, but firmly, that if the monarchy refused him, he had more to say. Think about it. His memoir Spare had already caused shockwaves across the globe. But what if it wasn't the whole story? What if there were secrets he had held back, details so damaging they could plunge the palace into crisis if revealed? Harry didn't say it outright, but the threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't quite see but know is burning. Have you noticed the pattern? Every time Harry has felt cornered, he has turned to the media. Oprah, Netflix, Spare. Each one was a shot fired across the palace walls. And each one landed. Why would this time be any different? Harry understood that while Charles held the crown, he held the narrative. In today's world, storytelling can be just as powerful as sovereignty. So Harry began his desperate gambit. He pressed harder for a private meeting with Charles, framing it as a final chance for reconciliation. He told aides that the king should meet him not as monarch, but as grandfather. He leaned on Diana's legacy, reminding Charles of the mother who had always fought for her children. He even suggested, subtly, that denying titles to Archie and Lilibet would look discriminatory, fueling a narrative that could turn global opinion against the crown. Do you see the danger in this? Harry wasn't just appealing to emotion anymore. He was applying pressure. He was raising the stakes. And Charles, already at his breaking point, recognized it for what it was: blackmail, dressed up as a plea. But Harry's desperation didn't stop there. He reached out to allies in the media, planting seeds of stories about Archie and Lilibet being unfairly denied their birthright. He knew how to stir public sympathy, how to frame his children as innocent victims of a cold monarchy. Social media lit up with debates. Hashtags began to trend. Was the monarchy denying two children their rightful titles because of prejudice? Was this the final proof that the institution was outdated, cruel, beyond repair? The pressure was building, and Harry knew it. Every headline was another shove against the palace gates. Every sympathetic voice was another crack in Charles's armor. But the king did not yield. Instead, Charles began to prepare his own countermove, one that Harry didn't see coming. Still, Harry pressed on. He spoke with lawyers about what rights his children might have under British law. He explored the possibility of taking the fight to Parliament, framing it as a matter of constitutional fairness. Can you imagine the chaos if Harry had pursued that path? A prince dragging his father, the king, into legal disputes over titles. It would have been a scandal unlike any other, a public humiliation for the monarchy on a scale not seen in generations. But even as Harry explored these options, he knew the real battlefield wasn't in the courts. It was in the court of public opinion. And that's where Meghan entered the picture once again. From California, she encouraged him to hold firm, to remember that they weren't just fighting for themselves, but for their children's legacy. Meghan, always the strategist, reminded Harry that perception is power. If the world saw Charles as a grandfather refusing his grandchildren, sympathy would swing their way. And so Harry doubled down. He told anyone who would listen that Archie and Lilibet deserved their place in the royal family. He portrayed himself as the father fighting for his children against an unyielding institution. He played the victim and the warrior all at once. But here's the irony. The harder Harry pushed, the more isolated he became. Courtiers rolled their eyes. William grew more furious. Even allies within Britain who once sympathized began to whisper that Harry had gone too far, that he was using his children as pawns in a bitter game of power. The very desperation that Harry thought would win him sympathy was starting to backfire. Still, he pressed on. Because desperation doesn't see logic. It only sees survival. And just when Harry thought he had cornered Charles, just when he believed the king would have to bend under the pressure, Charles struck back. But not with anger, not with threats. With something far more devastating. Because Charles wasn't just sitting idly by while his son schemed. He had been quietly gathering his own arsenal, evidence, accounts, revelations that Harry didn't expect. And with one calculated move, Charles would remind Harry that kings do not yield to gambits. They crush them. But Harry didn't see it coming. He believed he still held the upper hand. He believed his desperate gambit would force his father's hand. He was wrong. Every storm has an eye, and in the middle of this royal hurricane stood Meghan Markle. To the outside world, Harry was the one making demands, flying across the Atlantic, facing his father, and pushing for titles. But those who knew the couple whispered something different. Meghan was the strategist, the driving force behind the agenda, the architect of every move. And in Chapter 7, the truth about Meghan's role comes into sharp, unavoidable focus. Let's start with what we already know. Meghan never hid her struggles with the monarchy. From the very beginning, she clashed with its rigid traditions, its hierarchies, its invisible rules. She saw it not as a family, but as an institution designed to control and confine. When she and Harry walked away, it was presented as liberation, freedom from an outdated system. She told Oprah the titles didn't matter. She insisted her children didn't need the royal brand. But words are one thing, strategy another. Behind closed doors, Meghan saw the value in those titles. She understood that Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet weren't just names. They were lifelong badges of status. They meant credibility on the global stage. They meant opportunities for influence, for branding, for leverage. In Hollywood and international circles, a prince and princess command more attention than simply Archie and Lilibet Mountbatten-Windsor. Meghan knew this, and she made sure Harry knew it too. Now, here's where the contradictions start to unravel. Publicly, Meghan had claimed that titles brought nothing but burden. Privately, she argued they offered protection, prestige, and permanence. Can you see the irony? The same institution she accused of suffocating her, she now wanted to embrace her children. It's a contradiction so glaring, so dripping with irony, that even supporters struggled to defend it. But Meghan wasn't just pushing Harry to ask politely. She was pushing him to fight. She urged him to frame it as justice, as fairness, as something owed to their children. And Harry, torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his father, sided with Meghan. Because in his eyes, Meghan had given up everything for him. The country she called home, the career she built, the privacy she once cherished. The least he could do was fight for her vision of their children's future. Here's where it gets even more complicated. Insiders whispered that Meghan had been holding private discussions with allies in America, framing the battle for titles not as a family dispute, but as a civil rights issue. If Archie and Lilibet were denied recognition while other royal grandchildren carried titles, what did that say about the monarchy? Could this be portrayed as discriminatory? Could it become a global scandal? Meghan understood the optics, and she was prepared to weaponize them. That was Meghan's genius, and her danger. She didn't fight battles on the monarchy's terms. She fought them on the world's terms, in the arenas where Charles and William had no control. The media, Hollywood, international public opinion. If the palace was a fortress, Meghan fought from the outside, launching arrows that pierced its walls. But here's the turning point. Charles had seen through it. He knew Meghan wasn't just advising Harry. She was orchestrating the entire campaign. He had seen the leaks, the timing of stories, the coordination between California press contacts and sympathetic journalists in Britain. He had pieced together the puzzle and realized this wasn't Harry alone. This was Harry and Meghan together, with Meghan pulling more strings than anyone wanted to admit. And then came the revelation that truly shattered their case. Documents, correspondence, whispers of deals struck behind the scenes. Evidence suggesting Meghan had, at one point, negotiated with media companies and potential backers using the possibility of Archie and Lilibet's royal status as leverage. Titles weren't just about dignity. They were bargaining chips, assets in the Sussex's brand portfolio. Imagine the impact when Charles uncovered this. The demand for titles was no longer framed as a father protecting his children. It was a calculated move in a larger strategy of influence and profit. For Charles, that was the final straw. He could tolerate insults. He could tolerate criticism. But he could not tolerate the monarchy itself being turned into a commercial asset. That crossed a line deeper than family. It touched the crown's very legitimacy. And for Harry, This revelation was devastating. Because if Charles confronted him with the evidence, Harry would be forced to face the possibility that his wife's strategy was less about family and more about power. It would mean admitting he had been a pawn in Meghan's larger game. Can you imagine the torment of that realization? To believe you're fighting for your children, only to learn you've been fighting for something far more transactional? Yet Harry, blinded by love and loyalty, refused to see it that way. He doubled down. He defended Meghan fiercely, insisting she was misunderstood, vilified, scapegoated. He cast her as Diana 2.0, the outsider destroyed by the monarchy's cruelty. But every defense only deepened Charles's resolve. Because in Charles's eyes, Meghan wasn't Diana. She wasn't a victim. She was the one holding the dagger to the monarchy's throat. This is the truth about Meghan's role. She wasn't in the background. She wasn't a bystander. She was at the center, directing the storm, fueling Harry's desperation, and pushing him into a confrontation that might destroy his relationship with his father forever. And the palace knew it. Charles knew it. William knew it. Even courtiers whispered it, which left Harry in the most dangerous position of all, isolated, mistrusted, and increasingly desperate, defending a cause that looked less like love for his children and more like ambition for his wife. But here's the tragic twist. Meghan's influence, powerful as it was, wasn't the endgame. Because as the media storm erupted, Charles had been preparing something far more lethal than whispers and suspicions. He was ready to expose the truth in a way that would leave Harry with no defense, no refuge, and no way back. Because one revelation about Meghan's past negotiations would destroy their entire case. And once that revelation surfaced, the palace battle would turn into all-out war. The storm didn't begin with thunder. It began with whispers, soft, almost imperceptible at first, then swelling into a roar that consumed headlines across Britain and beyond. By the time Harry left the Well Child Awards ceremony, smiling awkwardly for photographers while Meghan remained thousands of miles away in California, the storm had already broken. The world wasn't talking about sick children or charity. It was talking about Harry's agenda, Meghan's influence, and King Charles's fury. This was the media's playground. And once the story began to spread, there was no stopping it. Leaks began to appear in the press. Palace aides alarmed by Duke's demands. Harry pushing for titles behind closed doors. Charles unmoved by son's pleas. Each headline carried just enough truth to sting, just enough speculation to inflame. The message was clear. Harry had come to Britain not as a returning son, but as a lobbyist. And that narrative, once unleashed, could not be contained. Now imagine the chaos inside the Sussex camp. In California, Meghan scrolled through articles, seething. This wasn't the story they had planned. They wanted sympathy. They wanted the world to see Archie and Lilibet as innocent victims of a cold monarchy. Instead, the media painted Harry as manipulative, desperate, and calculating. The optics were slipping, and fast. And Meghan knew the rule. When the palace strikes with leaks, you counter-strike harder. So the Sussex team began their own offensive. Anonymous friends spoke to American outlets. The narrative was flipped. Suddenly, the world read about how cruel it was for Charles to deny his grandchildren their rightful place, how Harry had been treated like a stranger in his own homeland, how Meghan's absence was proof of how toxic the environment remained. Sympathy pieces began to surface, especially in U.S. media. The battle lines were drawn, not just in Buckingham Palace, but across the Atlantic. Do you see what's happening here? This wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was a media war. Each side using carefully chosen leaks and stories to weaponize public opinion. And the public? They were hooked. Every article sparked debates online. Every headline was dissected by pundits. Was Harry the victim of a heartless monarchy, or was he a manipulator using his children as pawns? Was Charles a firm king defending the crown, or a father shutting the door on reconciliation? The irony was brutal. Both sides accused the other of leaking. Both sides claimed innocence. And both sides were guilty. Let's not forget the tabloids. British papers reveled in the drama, with front pages screaming betrayal, exile, and family collapse. Commentators went on air, some defending Harry, others mocking him. American late-night hosts cracked jokes about royal family dysfunction. On social media, hashtags trended daily. Hashtag Team Harry, hashtag Stand with Charles, hashtag Justice for Archie. Each one pulled millions of people into the feud. But here's where the emotional spike hits. In the middle of this media war were the children, Archie and Lilibet. Their names were everywhere, their futures debated by strangers who had never met them. For Harry, this was salt in the wound. The very thing he claimed to protect them from, the harsh spotlight of monarchy, was now burning brighter than ever, fueled not by the institution but by his own fight to secure their titles. Can you feel the irony? And while Harry scrambled, Charles played the long game. His courtiers were careful, measured, calculated. Instead of lashing out, they quietly allowed leaks to highlight Harry's desperation. They painted him not as a crusader for justice, but as a man obsessed, consumed by ambition. It was subtle, but it worked. Opinion polls began to show a shift. Sympathy for Harry dipped. Respect for Charles grew. For a man who had long feared he could never live up to his mother's legacy, this was a crucial victory. But the storm wasn't just about perception. It was about survival. Behind the scenes, Charles was preparing something bigger than leaks. Something that would go beyond whispers in the press and land like a thunderclap. Harry, meanwhile, doubled down. He gave subtle cues in speeches, referencing fairness and justice, hinting at his children's birthright. He hoped the media would pick up the trail, amplify the message, and turn public sympathy back in his favor. Yet the harder Harry pushed, the more the press painted him as desperate. Photographs of him looking tense, awkward, even angry, flooded the internet. Commentators analyzed every twitch of his expression. A man cornered, one paper called him. A prince without a palace, declared another. And as these headlines circled the globe, Harry realized the battle was slipping out of his control. The Sussexes had always thrived on narrative control. With Oprah, with Netflix, with Spare, they told their story in their words, on their terms. But this time, the palace had outmaneuvered them. The media storm was no longer theirs to command. It was a whirlwind, wild and unforgiving, and it was consuming Harry piece by piece. Still, Harry didn't give up. He believed the storm could be turned. He believed that if he pushed harder, leaked smarter, and framed the story just right, the world would once again see him as the victim of a ruthless monarchy. But what he didn't know was that Charles wasn't done. The king wasn't just relying on public perception. He was readying something that would devastate Harry's credibility far more than any headline. Because while Harry fought his war in the press, Charles had something more potent: the truth. Evidence, documents, conversations that would prove Harry's agenda wasn't noble, it was dangerous. And once revealed, it would silence Harry's narrative in a way no spin could undo. The storm was raging. The world was watching. But behind the clouds, thunder was building. Because behind the headlines, Charles had already set a trap Harry couldn't escape. Secrets are the currency of royalty. Hidden letters, confidential reports, private conversations whispered in corridors, all of it guarded fiercely, because in the monarchy, perception is survival. And in this battle between father and son, perception had become the sharpest weapon. What Harry didn't know was that while he was pushing, leaking, and playing the media, Charles had been quietly building a case of his own. He had what aides began to call the secret files. These weren't fantasy. They weren't rumors. They were real, tangible pieces of information, documents, memos, correspondence, that painted a very different picture of Harry's return and his demands. While Harry framed himself as a loving father fighting for his children's birthright, the files revealed something darker, a strategy of manipulation, pressure, and self-interest. Imagine the scene. Deep inside Buckingham Palace, within rooms the public will never see, Charles's most trusted aides gathered around a long polished table. They placed before him a set of reports compiled over months. Reports detailing conversations Harry had held with intermediaries, emails exchanged between Sussex representatives and outside organizations, notes from meetings where titles for Archie and Lilibet were discussed as assets, not honors. To Charles, it was damning. It was proof that this wasn't about protecting grandchildren. It was about power. And here's the sting. Some of the files suggested Meghan had even floated the idea of leveraging the titles in business negotiations. Not directly, not crudely, but subtly, phrases like global recognition, heritage branding, and royal prestige had crept into discussions with media partners. For the king, this was unforgivable. Titles weren't bargaining chips. They weren't tools for Netflix contracts or podcast deals. They were sacred, bound up with the history of 1,000 years. To treat them otherwise was to insult everything the monarchy stood for. Ask yourself, if you were Charles, what would you do? Confront your son immediately? Leak the information to destroy his credibility? Or hold it close, waiting for the moment when the truth would have the most devastating effect? Charles chose patience. That was his style. He was never impulsive like Diana, never fiery like his father, Prince Philip. He was calculated, deliberate. He knew Harry's desperation would grow, and when it peaked, the files would be his trump card.